Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. Oh, not quite yet.
Yeah.
Nearly ready. You know what? I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for joining us. Suheyl, I wondered whether you'd please begin by introducing yourselves to the students at our summer school.
Well, I'm a retired government officer who worked in an institute dedicated to research and publication on one of the icons and founding fathers of Pakistan. And since his works concerned comparative religion and Islamic studies, as well as wisdom poetry, I was involved in interfaith activity as well. And ever since, after my retirement, I am now working as the professor of Islamic studies and humanities at large at a local university in Lahore.
Who is this Islamic figure? What is the name of this Islamic figure you're referring to? Whose work?
Muhammad Iqbal. Muhammad Iqbal, the poet philosopher.
Iqbal. And Suheyl, you've been involved with Elijah as a member of the Academy for a long time.
Yes. I think it's more than 10 years.
Wonderful.
More than 10 years.
Wonderful. So Suheyl, let's begin with the questions about memory. And I wondered whether you'd just start by, in a very broad sense, telling us how significant memory is in Islam. How central is the concept of memory in Islam?
Well, like all traditional and ancient peoples and civilizations, in Islamic civilization or Islamic tradition, memory is also of immense importance, because all of these traditional ancient people and civilizations have been dominated by a presiding idea of a center of the origin. As in your case, the covenant with. So in Islam, it's also of immense importance because of, metaphysically speaking, because of the relation to the origin as well as to the return, the alpha and omega. And then on the scriptural or moral plane, memory is again immensely important, because to keep memory intact, truthful, and correct is a guarantee and a scriptural requirement for my religious responsibility. And in both respects, my responsibility towards the Lord as well as my responsibility to other humans, memory plays a most vital, important role in the Islamic tradition.
There's two things. First of all, I hope you'll share with us a little more detail about what it is you are remembering in Islam. But I particularly, if you'd follow up with this idea of the alpha to the omega, what were you referring to there? Not sure that I understood.
Alpha and omega, I said the origin of a religion and origin of humans. This idea is directly related to memory, and since religion by its definition is religio, that which binds again the human to the divine, and here memory comes in. So when I say alpha, it's the origin. You got it?
Yes, it's much clearer now. Or there's obviously so much to talk about, because you're talking about remembering the divine, remembering Allah, remembering the Almighty. And we will need to go further into what that might mean. But just before we do, memory is also part of telling our story. And I wondered whether you'd share with us first the key parts of the narrative that Muslims remember.
The key points of the narrative?
Of the narrative, yes, the key points in the Islamic story, in your story as a Muslim. What do you remember?
Yeah. First of all, the Quran itself, the message itself, and the Islamic doctrine itself calls itself a reminder. You're taking you back to the memory. Firstly, the human covenant with God, which was in the time immemorial. And then through the revelation, when the founding father of the religion initiated the religion and God entered history once again, spoke to humanity once again. So memory, a reminder of that covenant with God, and memory of the revelation which the founder brought to mankind once again.
I know that the story of Muhammad's life is tremendously important for Muslims. I wonder if you could tell me the key things you remember in terms of Muhammad's life, and perhaps the significance of why those things.
Exactly. The memory of the Prophet has two dimensions, which Muslim collectivity or Muslim mind tries to remember or keeps intact, or to keep intact. One is the miraculous aspect of it, that is his connection with God, receiving revelation, being in constant touch with the divine. And second, which is the horizontal plane of that same message, is its projection into the human domain through his personal example and the social, how would you say, the framework. So we remember in both aspects, the vertical aspect of revelation, the contact between the intersection between the divine and the human, and the horizontal, that is the message in terms of rites, rituals, worship, and going back, returning to the origin, returning to God. So Prophet's life is important and constantly remembered and kept fresh in the Muslim mind in both these aspects. Firstly, that he was the messenger and the connection between the divine and the human. And secondly, that for the future of the community, his personal horizontal example, entering into every domain of human life and setting an example, and then we remember by reminding ourselves of all those situations where he entered into a human situation and gave us a mold or a channel to follow. So we remember, and the part of the memory in both these aspects.
So I'm obviously not Muslim myself, but I have been shown the Quran. I've read the Quran. And one of the things that's striking to me is that it's not chronological. It doesn't tell a story from beginning to end. Yet Muslims tell a story. There's a story in Islam. There's a story of the revelation to the Prophet and how he spread that revelation and how Islam spread around the world. So I wondered whether you talk about the way that you read the Quran and other sacred texts in order to learn your story or share your story, or is it an oral tradition as much as a written tradition?
to the case of the Jewish Bible, that its books were arranged later on by the tradition in the chronological order. And the first part, you have the chronological order now, and the later is as it arrived on the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. So same with the Quranic narrative, that it now in the form that we have, it was not revealed in that sequence. But as every revelation came, the Prophet indicated the place where it has to be written and recorded. So the narrative which we have now is in the same sense ordained a recodification by the Prophet himself of that sacred text, as in the case of the Jewish Bible.
I want to push you a little further on this, because
Yes.
you've indicated now perhaps the chronology that is telling a story from beginning to end is not as important as a different type of memory. You've conceded that it's not a story that goes through time, that runs through time, yet it is clearly an important message and there are memories involved. So I wondered whether you'd reflect on that a little with us.
Can you elaborate a little more on the question?
The Quran itself is not chronological. It's not telling a story through time. So
Yes.
I wondered, how significant is time? How significant is chronology in Islam?
In Islam, I'm not sure whether I'm getting your question right. Let me try to understand.
How about, Suheyl, that we come back to this idea a bit later on? I'm just,
All right.
when I was trying to push you a little more about what Muslims remember. What you remember the story of Muhammad, you remember his life story, but clearly the source is not Quranic, it's extra Quranic as well. So what
Yes.
So what
right.
are the key things in Muhammad's life that Muslims remember? And are there events outside the life of the Prophet that are significant for Muslims to remember?
I see. Firstly, let me say that in one sense, Quran is the unfolding story of Muhammad's complete mission. But you are right in saying that the complete story of his life, the historical setting, is not, it has extra Quranic sources as well, which is called hadith, or the historical record. And apart from the significant things which directly originate from the Quranic text or the narrative, like his heavenly ascension and meeting different prophets of Israel and other older prophets during the journey, which started from again our place, the temple of Solomon, Aqsa Mosque. This is directly from the Quran, but there are extra materials which record the whole his life story. And among those of that are extra Quranic materials, there is a huge body of historical record which warrant remembering and refreshing again and again, especially when we look at it with regard to the political structures, the social structures, and the human domain, that is the society. in which his story unfolded. So it would be a long, say, recapitulation if I go by instance by instance that this and this that need to be remembered. But broadly, it comes under the rubric which I just mentioned.
So you would say that a key point to remember is Muhammad's ascension to heaven from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That would be a key point.
Well, one of these, yes, because this was of importance from various angles. But of the same category is the thing which needs to be remembered is human interaction on one side, and the different instances and records of his receiving the divine revelation.
Can you illustrate what you mean when you speak about the horizontal, about the human? What is it that is being remembered with Muhammad on this horizontal plane?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Firstly, one of his names most used in the Quran and most often remembered by the Muslims as a role model is of compassion and of mercy. A mercy for the whole world. Now this, when it translates into human terms or in human interaction or in society or towards the other human collectivities, this is of prime importance, that this person who was the recipient of the divine revelation, then on the horizontal plane, this manifests, the divine mercy manifests in that personality as the most merciful person of his environment. So that's what I mean when I say that this is the horizontal dimension of the vertical message which he received.
Could you share with us just one story, maybe a hadith or one story that you remember that illustrates that?
Nowadays, it's, as you know, a lot of talk about environment and care for the non-human parts of our environment. Once a contingent which he was leading was passing through a battlefield, and on their way he spotted that a bitch had just given birth to her litter, and they would have been trampled by the soldiers. He immediately deputed one of his close companions to stand on watch at that spot and ask the soldiers to clear the way, that they are out of the harm's way. It's a very simple, mundane thing, but shows that the care for even the non-human elements of our environment, not to say what to say of the humans.
It's very beautiful. And how do you share those stories? Do you have rituals, for example, that help share the memories? How do you share them from generation to generation and throughout the Muslim community?
That's right. Its primary way of sharing that memory and remembering and reminding ourselves of that metaphysical dimension of his personality is also originates from the Quran, that it's the ritual invoking of blessings and asking of grace on his personality. Quran enjoins on Muslims, which later on took the form of various ritual
we're frozen here. Have you frozen, Alon? Can you hear Suheyl? Oh dear.
Okay, I'm going to pick up while you try to reclaim your computer. Tell us about Suheyl, about memory, rituals and memory. How does ritual get carried? How does ritual convey memory? What rituals are there for remembering? No, I think Suhail's frozen. We've lost him.
I think the problem is Suheyl, not me. And
Yeah.
that means
So
that
close the session and restart it.
I will end meeting. End meeting.
Okay, close.